Please be seated. As many of you know, last summer I had an opportunity to go on sabbatical, and on my sabbatical I had this fabulous grant that allowed me to cycle from one cathedral to another in England. And I have to say, there were segments of this trip, so we would ride a little bit, then visit a cathedral, ride a little bit more, visit a cathedral. And the first segment was something you can imagine in your head, just right out of a dream. We were cycling on these beautiful country roads. It was clear, it was crisp, the weather was just perfect. And to the left and to the right were these rolling hills covered in flowers and poppies and all sorts of things. It was ideal. We got to the end of our first leg of trip and thought, wow, I can't wait for the next leg, the next part of the trip. And the second part of the trip, the second part was a little bit like the first, except it was going to rain a little bit. So we went through these hills and these valleys, and there was some rain, and we did get wet, but it was like the perfect, ideal rain in the sense when you're exercising. It's actually nice to have a little bit of rain occasionally. It's not hot, it's perfect. Well, this second trip was really we were looking forward to because my mother-in-law had gifted us a special night at a beautiful estate to celebrate our anniversary. And so this estate was right outside of Ely. And so we were looking forward to this because it was a fancy, fancy hotel. And we had no plans for fancy, fancy hotels on our trip. And so, but the problem is that it was 2 to 3, maybe 4 miles off the beaten path. Because, it's an estate, right? And so we chartered our way through this, and it was beautiful, the country road. And eventually, though, this country road that we were riding on became kind of a highway. Now, when I charted this out, it all had bikeable path lanes. Like, I never picked anything that wasn't supposedly a bikeable path lane. What I didn't understand is that a Californian understanding of what is a bikeable pathway or lane is very different than the English version of that. First, there's no wide roads, right? They're all very narrow. Second, bikers there, they're very courageous people. It doesn't matter if they're on a highway, they'll just keep going. And all the cars seem to know this and just wait for the long time for them to be able to pass. Well, this is not something that we were too excited to do. No, not at all. And then, of course, as soon as it became a highway, it became, instead of a drizzle, to a downright downpour. And so here we are on the side of this two-lane highway, cars passing us at 45 to 50 miles an hour in the absolute terrible rain. We've got to get out of this. That's what I remember thinking. And it was raining so hard, I wear glasses, and you know how it fogs up and you really can't see, and your depth perception is really, really off. And so we were looking for a sidewalk or something that we can pull over into and reevaluate our plans. And finally, a sidewalk appeared to the left of us, or appeared to the side of us. I don't even know if it was left or right. I'm dyslexic, and they drive on the other side of the highway there. But you know what I mean. It appears, and Tom gets up onto the sidewalk, he's right in front of me, gets on top of the sidewalk. So I'm looking for the space to get up on that sidewalk, and I missed it entirely. Now, my depth perception was really off. What I thought was a curb ended up being more like a curb. Now, anyone who's ever ridden a bike that is not how you get the bike up onto the sidewalk. I went flying off the bike onto the sidewalk and hit my head so hard that I didn't know this later, but I cracked my helmet. That's how hard it was. Wow. It was something. I immediately got up on my bike again to get the last 2 miles, because who wants to walk in the rain the last 2 miles. And of course, I fell down immediately again. I was completely overcome with fear at that very moment. How am I ever going to do this? What was I thinking? Now, we did choose to walk after I fell the second time because it was like, something is not right. Let's just walk. And so we walked on the sidewalk and when the sidewalk ended in the mud on the side of the road. And you can imagine the trucks coming by and these big whooshes of rainwater onto us. We were tripping in mud and muck. We were so disgusting. We made it, right? We made it. But I think that moment was a moment where I was totally covered in, I was totally wrapped up in my own fear. It makes sense, right? Mack truck, not good. And I clearly had what are the responses for fear? There's flight, and I think that's the one I took, right? There's fight, there's also freeze, and then fawning, which is like, trying to make good, happy with the things that are against you. So, I bet you can imagine a time when you were completely overcome in fear. What's your body response to that fear? Tell me some of those physical things that happen when you're afraid. Yeah, you clench. That's that freeze or that fight, prepare to fight moment, right? What else? Yeah, breathing is just not, you're all tensed up. That's exactly right. Someone said stomach ache, right? And what happens to your thought processes? Like, it just stops, right? You're not thinking at all. You're using that part of the brain that is not conducive to that rational thought at all. It's in the front, right? And so you are just doing. Your world gets very narrow. That's what happens when we are in that fear. And it's so hard in those moments to muster the courage to move forward, at least in any rational way. Our two stories today, one from the Old Testament and the Gospel, are both stories about great courage and great moments of what could be on the edge of that fear, right? We have David up against Goliath, standing there thinking, what is he going to do, right? And then, of course, the disciples with Jesus in the boat. Now, think about the disciples in the boat. What were the profession of the disciples? They were fishermen. So, if you're on a boat and the fishermen are afraid, that gives you a sense of what was really going on. It must have been a dramatic storm, right? It's like being on an airplane and seeing the stewardess get nervous. Then you really are worried. So those disciples were up against such insurmountable odds. They were seeing that the boat was beginning to sink. It was taking on water. They were going to die in their minds. They were totally caught up in that fear. And what was Jesus doing? Sleeping. Sleeping, completely at peace. Because Jesus knew something that they didn't know, that total trust in God on what was to happen next. So here we have two stories about unsurmountable odds. And we tell these stories, these faith stories, in times of great unpredictable things, just to remind us to trust in God. Now, if you think about the Gospel of Mark, it was written 70 years after Jesus had died, and the temple had been destroyed. So the Jerusalem temple had been destroyed, Jesus had died, and here are these early believers in a world that is completely unpredictable. And so hearing the story of them being in this boat, surrounded by this angry sea, you can see how they felt like they were in the boat with the disciples. Here's a fisherman's prayer. "Oh God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small." In Mark's gospel, Jesus has come to heal and to teach and to preach. He had exorcised demons, demons being these death-dealing forces that I talked about in the previous weeks. And then he had talked about the parables, how God is so incredible that it grows and grows and it grows and it grows like a mustard seed into a massive tree. And then today's story, where they enter a boat at night when the storms are prevalent, and they go against these incredible odds. And Jesus, just like that, instantly calms the storm and rebukes the disciples. Those disciples and we today sometimes feel like we're up against the unsurmountable odds of the unpredictable nature of the world we live in. But we believe in this God who can just calm the seas. As we enter into all those things that make our world unpredictable, just name them out loud. Feel free to. I think of election time, right? I also think of fire season and the fact that we've had more fires this year than we had in prior years. I heard something. Yeah, I didn't quite hear it, but I trusted that it is. Yeah. Oh, the heat, absolutely. The fact that our climate is changing in ways that we don't understand. All these things feel insurmountable and might create in us a want to be afraid like the disciples, but we must not be afraid like the disciples because they forgot one important thing. What did they forget? That Jesus was in the boat with them, to trust in God. I heard it. That Jesus is in the boat with them, because that's the God we believe in. That's the God we believe in, that God is with us no matter where we are. No matter what unsurmountable odds are up against us. If we are on the side of the road completely drenched in mud, or the hospital bed, or our homes, or our cars, or our offices, all these places where we encounter these unsurmountable odds and fear-inducing moments, we must not forget that Jesus is in the boat with us, always. And we must trust in a God that love and light will be the answer. That all shall be well, even if it isn't our understanding of what shall be well. Now, I've been talking about fear. And really, when I talk about that unsurmountable power of God, the term that comes to mind is awe. The disciples said they had awe after Jesus changed the storm. Fear and awe have the exact same Hebrew word. And that when you translate it, you take the context of it. So that helps you understand how closely connected they are in our tradition. That fear and awe are pretty much, they could be two sides of the same coin. But we've since learned a lot more about fear and awe actually come from different parts in our brain, are almost completely different responses, even though we have the same adrenaline response, right? So before I go on about awe, what are moments of awe you have experienced? Call them out.
Sunset.
Absolutely.